What's up, guys? Welcome back to Engine25 Reviews. This is a show where I invite friends, colleagues, academics, filmmakers, and other people who are just funnier, smarter, and more qualified than me. We talk about movies and TV shows and nerd out about stuff we think is cool. If you like that, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and tell your friends. I'm going to spin up and try to get more episodes out this fall. So if you ring that bell, you never miss one. We're available on video on YouTube and as an audio podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. More to come soon, I hope. Just search Engine25 Reviews on your favorite service, no space in Engine25, or hit one of the links in the notes down below. My name is Brandon. I'm your host. You can find me at Engine25 on all the things, sometimes with an underscore at the end. Today we're going to talk about House of the Dragon Season 2 on HBO. Before we get there, as always, I'm going to introduce our guests. I got some regular guests and good friends on the show today, Adam and Katy. They're both big genre fantasy people. And Adam, what's going on with you? How are you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Cool.
Dry after the tropical storm came through, but otherwise good.
Oh yeah, we didn't get a lot of rain, like even any. It was weird.
10 inches over 2 days.
That seems like a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Katy? How's things up north?
Wet.
Things are pretty high, pretty humid. We got a little bit of that rain from the tropical storm, but nothing too bad. It's nice and sunny here today, as you can see.
Yes. Did it turn north? Because I could swear that we didn't get anything. Like we might have had a cloudy afternoon. I didn't even know there was a hurricane.
New York.
Okay, yeah. I didn't even know there was a hurricane until I was sitting at Red Lobster, and they had the Olympics on the TV, and then it went to a weather report, and it's like, oh look, there's a hurricane coming.
Right, I remember you texted me on the day that it was raining the most, and you were like, "Oh, I didn't realize there was a hurricane. Are y'all good?" Yeah.
Yeah, that's so that's fun. Adam lives somewhere near water. I guess Katy would. That counts too. You're certainly closer to the ocean than I am.
I don't think that's true.
Or are you on the western side of the place where you are?
Yeah.
Okay.
West.
All right.
Almost New York.
Okay. Anyway, yeah. So we're talking about House of the Dragon on HBO. For the viewers, I was a big Game of Thrones guy. I back in college on a Sunday night where I didn't have anything to do, and they were I was sitting at home doing homework or just doing whatever. And they had advertised this Game of Thrones show, at the end of there was a commercial for it at the end of every hour for a week. So it's like, all right, I'm not doing anything. I'll watch this. And then it became a large part of my personality for a long time. A lot of people know that the last couple of seasons of Game of Thrones took a turn, many would say, for the worse. But that's a general sentiment. I would say there are good things about that, but there were certainly more problems than pluses. Anyway, and I spent a lot of that time watching the show with Adam. So,
True.
Yep, and then. It took a few years off, and HBO is apparently developing, or at least concepting, 5 or more Game of Thrones spin-off shows. House of the Dragon was one of those, and it was the one that they picked up. And we actually reviewed season 1 on the show. Adam and I did. So if I'll drop the link to that one in the show notes if anyone's interested. But Adam, what's your general take on, how would you describe your relationship with Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon? And did you like this season?
So quick backstory, my relationship with Game of Thrones, similar to yours, I started watching it in college. I think I was moving into a new apartment when it was on air, or just I remember moving stuff around my room or whatever, and I was just watching it in the background, and I loved that it was good guy Sean Bean. I was like, I like Sean Bean, but he actually gets to be the good guy this time. And then I think where I started watching was a week or 1 or 2 weeks before when King Robert dies and then Littlefinger betrays Ned. And I was like, that episode was when I finally caught up. I was like, wait, what? Now I have to wait a week. And that was, the rest is history, because I watched the rest. We had viewing starting in like season 2. We had viewing parties at the apartment to watch it.
Yeah,
Every week, which I think you came to some of those. Yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely there for the season premiere, and probably a couple of others.
I remember when I'd moved here, my friends, we were still watching it as the seasons came out. And when the Battle of the Bastards happened, we had a betting board. We all put in bids and bets on who was going to die at the Battle of the Bastards or at the Battle of Winterfell. And we were just had it up on the wall, and ends up only one of us was right. But, you know, as you said, the last couple of seasons maybe didn't live up to what they could have been. But then, of course, I was all in as soon as I heard that they were doing House of the Dragon. I'd already listened to the audiobook of Fire and Blood.
I was going to ask if you had read anything. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm halfway through reading Game of Thrones. I finally got off my butt and started actually reading the A Song of Ice and Fire novels. But I know a lot about the world because I dove headfirst into the background and the lore and the history of the setting. But yeah, no, I loved season 1 of House of the Dragon. It had some flaws, but what show doesn't? And this season blew season 1 out of the water, and I already liked season 1. Like this, I really enjoyed season 2 of House of the Dragon. There you go. That's the short.
Okay. What about you, Katie? Were you watching Game of Thrones when it was new? And how do you to tell me about how you like House of the Dragon so far?
I believe I was still in high school when Game of Thrones started. And I remember binge watching a lot of it, like in the car on a family road trip up north one summer. Because I had like convinced my parents to like add HBO to our package or something. Back when you still had to like go through cable or something to get it. And because I was like, if we're going to take this long road trip, I'm going to binge watch House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones. And so when I got into college at Southern, I quickly had a friend group, and we would go to our friend's house, which was like right across from campus, where we had all of our parties, and we'd have watch parties for Game of Thrones.
Nice.
So I ended up having that same experience of like having a big group of friends to come over. And I remember, I forget which season it is, when we can spoil Game of Thrones if that's been long enough.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The Sept gets blown up and Tommen kills himself.
That's the end of season 6. Yeah.
So at the end of season, I know for sure that we were watching season 6 all together, because I remember specifically that finale and having like 20 or 30 people, not 30, probably like 20, in the living room of my friend's house, and us all just like collectively like gasping and experiencing it together. And I was just like, this is the best. I love watching this with people. This is like the best way to do this. And I'm from Statesboro, so I would go from my house where I grew up, and I would drive all the way into town and be like rushing against the clock to make sure I got there on time because everybody else just like lived in like the middle of Statesboro. So I remember that very fondly. And when Game of Thrones ended, I remember I was actually in Arizona starting my master's degree, and I like didn't know anybody around, and I was living with my parents at the time, and they had no context for it. And I was just like, you don't understand. I was like making them watch it with me. I was like, you have to see this. It's a cultural moment. And they were like, whatever.
I mean, I know my dad likes it, but I know he's also blissfully unaware of the greater,
Yeah. They were just like, okay. But yeah, and so House of the Dragon, I watched it last season. I really liked last season. And I started watching it late this season because I thought that I would like just wait until it was all out and then binge it. And then I was like, fuck it. No, I'm going to watch it. I'm going to experience it with everybody else. And a friend of mine is very into it. She's a medievalist and
Cool.
is working on a publishable article about House of the Dragon at the moment. So I saw her today and I was like, I'm talking about the show tonight. Like,
Nice.
hope I do a good job. And she was like, yes, but she's the one that's very much, she studies like feminist mythologies and like medieval literature. So she's very, very interested in like the feminist depictions and of like motherhood and how motherhood is depicted as monstrous on different levels and within the medieval scope. So she's a very, very intelligent person who is much more qualified to talk about those kinds of things for the show than I am, but I'll do my best.
It's okay. That's why you're here. I love this show. I will say, like, I was probably a little higher on the first season. The writing, I think, is a lot more intricate this time around for a lot of good reasons. But I think that we're going to move into spoilers pretty fast because I think the reasons it's going to be hard to break things down without talking about specifics. But no, yeah, I in general was very happy with this season. I definitely have some thoughts. So we're going to go ahead and talk spoilers. If anyone has not finished the season, you are welcome to keep watching. But I certainly recommend that you finish all the episodes and then come back and hang out with us the rest of the time. First of all, I gotta ask, because there's a correct answer. Are you guys Team Green or Team Black?
I'm not going first.
I don't think I can answer that question unbiased, having read the history.
I mean, and that's
what happened.
part of the thing, and so full transparency, I
As far as
don't
the show is concerned,
I don't
I'm
read
100%
things.
Team Black.
Yeah, like I don't read things. And when I got into Game of Thrones, and it's like, do I have the patience to try to sit down and read this? I was like, oh, it's going to be 6,000 pages. I was like, yeah, I'm not even going to try. So I have done a lot of deep diving on Wikipedia for those who,
Ice and Fire.
yeah, and for anyone who cares, like something very close to what the ending of this show is likely to be is it's just on the internet. You can read it if you want. And Fire and Blood, that's more like a history book, right? Because like the Game of Thrones are like first-hand accounts from specific characters, is like how it's written, and this is like somebody looking back and writing and it's like kind of unreliable, and there are conflicting accounts and stuff. It seems really interesting, but it's more like a history book than the other ones are. Is that right?
Yeah, it is written entirely in setting as if it is a book written by a maester, compiling different accounts of what has happened throughout the history of the Targaryens. And like specifically when they talk about the Dance of the Dragons, which is about the middle third of the book, the three main accounts that they rely on are maester. Names are escaping me, but the maester from King's Landing, the one,
Orwell.
the green, thank you, Orwell. His accounts, which they specify multiple times, is based on his recounting of the events while he was imprisoned after the war. So they're like, okay, maybe he tried to make himself look good, and you don't know, so that's unreliable. Or the account of the sept at the time, which is like the priest or the pope.
Yeah.
And the accounts of a mushroom who was Rhaenyra's jester, the court fool, who is not in the show, which is sad because Mushroom's accounts are the best in the whole book. But again, you have to take them with a grain of salt. So
There are a lot of people in this show named after food. There's also, I guess, blood doesn't get, but there's blood and cheese. There's a guy named Mushroom apparently.
not in the show.
So what about you, Katie? I'm firmly on the Team Black Rhaenyra side. I also think that the writers of the show they've chosen a bias to kind of tell the story from, and some characters maybe fairly, maybe unfairly based on the text. I haven't read the text. are kind of depicted in a more villainous light in the series. And I don't know if that's the case in the novel or not, but no, yeah, I'm definitely on. I'm on Rhaenyra's side of things for sure.
I think I agree. That said, I think I definitely like empathize or identify more with Alicent. She's more interesting to me in some ways.
Oh, there are
I
wonderful
enjoy
characters on the other side of things. Alicent, I love Otto Hightower. You know, like they're very cool, but you know they're terrible.
In terms of like claimed the throne, like we know in the show that it was a mistake. Like we know that. You don't necessarily know that from the book, from what I can tell. I haven't read it. But
No, there's that's not covered in detail. It's just, oh look, he died, and the Greens start plotting to take power.
right. So in terms of like this story that we get on screen, I mean, obviously it's like Team Black. Even Allison at the very end of this season is like, I think I made a mistake. So it's like, yeah, okay. So it's very obvious that
She realizes that, well, number one, she's powerless because she's a woman, and she's coming to that realization, but also she's picked up on the fact that all of her children are terrible. Helena is the most reasonable one. And there isn't, like, to be fair, there isn't really much of her in the series. And it's like, it's beginning to hint that Helena might have some sort of foresight or something. Like, it's very subtle, but like, I don't think it's certainly in the last episode, I don't think it's a coincidence that, when Aemond approaches Helena and says, you need to fly for us, and then Helena says, I'm not going to do that because you're all going to die. And then Helena is the one that shows up in Daemon's vision and essentially tells him the same thing. So I don't know if that's coincidental or intentional, but it kind of makes it seem like, Helena at least reads, like she knows what that helps,
And it's hinted at, but it's not covered in Fire and Blood because it's not the kind of thing that would be written in a historical book. But the two things Targaryens could do broadly was ride dragons and allegedly see the future. That's like the Aegon the Conqueror's dream. Like, he wasn't the only Targaryen. His great grandfather, however many greats, was the one who said, "Oh, Valeria's doomed. We should go sail over here and live on this island so we don't die with everybody else." So the gift of foresight is one of the traits of being a Targaryen.
And it's hinted at in the first season with Viserys as well. He was just never as like, attuned to it as like Helena. So they were already expanding that storyline from the very beginning.
And Adam kind of pointed on it. So like, characters are developed a lot more in detail because we get to spend more time with them in the show. And apparently, like certain like Rhaenyra is a lot more sympathetic in the show. And again, that may be bias of the writers, but just the fact that it's more of a historical account in the novel is very like, we don't get a lot of detail about what people are actually like for the most part, or how they interact with others. Which is interesting to me, so like a lot of that is creative license. And I think they do pretty well. I wanted to point out, there has been a little, like the online buzz for the season was very positive. And then there are some questions being asked about the finale and how it all wrapped up. And I think it's related to like the pacing of the show overall. Like the first season takes place over like 30 years, or there's like, they have the council, and then there's a time jump where Alicent and Rhaenyra are then teenagers, and we spend some time there, and then they time jump again when they become their adult selves with Olivia Cook and Emma Darcy. But yeah, it covers like a lot of detail, or a big period of time in those 10 episodes. this season, as far as I can tell, based on comparing to the dates on Wikipedia, it's like it's less than 2 years or so. Well, maybe not even that, and it's over 8 episodes.
Yeah,
It was
very
like
short in comparison.
yes. So like no, I guess my first question is, was 8 episodes enough? Because I know everyone wants to know the next thing, that everyone wants to see the next episode, and that's obviously intentional. But like, I would say that the end of this season was pretty understated compared to last season. Even just getting, the dragon fight where we lost Lucerys was a big like, oh, okay, so next season we're going to war, and then at the end of this season we're just like, oh, well, next season we're going to war. So
Well, I think so. One in the book, there's a line that the first battles of the Dance of the Dragons were waged with quill and ink, and I think that's what this show this season is showing, because like we're used to saying, oh, it's a war, everybody's going to be fighting. Like, guys, it is ostensibly medieval times. Like, you can't just fight. People have to travel.
I mean, yeah, it takes weeks to get anywhere.
Travel takes a long. Westeros is big. Like, there's I think going back to Game of Thrones, the first 3-4 episodes of Game of Thrones is just Ned and Robert
traveling
from Winterfell to King's Landing. That takes like 6 months. Like, in the story, that's like a 6-month journey to get from Winterfell down. Like, it is. Westeros is big.
Sounds like they need dragons.
Unless you're on a dragon, it takes a lot of time to go anywhere. And if you're like, okay, we have a kingdom that's all together, everybody's on the same side, except right now we suddenly need everybody to be on different sides. Hopefully ours, but maybe the other side. So it's gonna take time, and nobody wants to jump the gun because nobody wants to. Like, well, are my next door neighbors on my side, or are they on their side? So it's a slow process. So I think,
yeah, and if they have to travel and get,
expected it to just be like, oh, look, a war.
Yeah, if they have to get all the city states and all the other families, the other big houses on their side, like, that's the most time consuming part of it. And also, like, Daemon is at Harrenhal for like 6 episodes. And so I really like Simon Strong. He's just like, like a nice old man, and he's just kind of just watching, and he's like, I guess there are a lot of characters in here that are all about their own preservation, but like, I would say the same thing about Larys Strong. You like, especially near the end where he's like, where things are beginning to go poorly for the Greens. It was like, Aegon, we need to get out of here. But it's not because he's not because he's trying to protect Aegon. It's because he's trying to protect his Weasley self. What about any specific characters we want to call out? I know Katy mentioned she had some thoughts about Alicent, who is struggling to find her place struggling to find her place this season, now that that Aegon is of age and there are a lot of very big male personalities around.
I just really enjoy the portrayal of her. I'm blanking. Olivia Cook.
Yeah.
I really enjoy the way that she plays Alicent. I like the way that they frame her, like, cinematically. They use, just like really simple things with her to like convey. I loved that little like interlude of her, like, what do people keep saying, equating her little like baptism thing to? They keep saying something about it, but all I can think of is like how it's not so much like this like rebirth, rebaptism thing, as it is like, it reminds me, especially with all the bird motifs around, of this short novel by Kate Chopin called The Awakening. And in that novel, the main character is, she's a woman, she's been through whatever, and she's like ready to be done with all the men in her life. And then she just like walks out into the ocean and she's like, cool, I'm gonna die like this. So that's what it reminds me of because of that. And it's a very famous book, so it wouldn't be out of the scope of these writers to know about it.
Mhm.
So I don't see it so much as like this like rebaptism thing as it is just kind of like another melancholy kind of thing, because her romantic interest, the only like person in her life that she kind of chooses for herself, is Kristen Cole, and he's got the same kind of like very, very
I hate that guy.
pessimistic outlook. Yeah, and I don't like him either, except like I don't know what it was about this season finale, but that scene that he has with Gwen Hightower and the writing of that scene and the way it's acted, I was like, oh my God, like I'm having empathy for Kristen Cole. Like they're just such like complex, like just really intriguing characters that are the way that you see the character too, not just the way that it's acted or written, is so subjective. So I don't know. I really enjoyed like seeing the different ways that the Greens are trying to kind of like figure it out, because the Blacks are more or less like they know their purpose. They know what they're trying to achieve.
And Rhaenyra's goal, at least like up until the end here, she's trying to do it with as little bloodshed as possible.
Yeah.
And and that makes we have Aegon, who's just a shit. It's just like, just go fucking burn him, just and it takes, and to be fair, like there are a lot of people on the council that are like, no, that's a terrible idea. But it's they're where's I going with this?
It's just so interesting because like the Blacks they seem to be on the complete other side of it, but this finale I think is so much more suited to first of all, I think there should have been 10 episodes, but with what they had, I feel like it emphasized different ways to create suspense and drama.
Absolutely. And it was a stupendous episode of television. I would say I think it's a little on the weak side as far as a big season finale when we're everyone's anticipating what happens next. Like even if it was 10 episodes and this was still episode 8, it would have been totally fine.
It's a finale of character development. I realized after I watched it again, and I really like it for that reason, because then you've got Jace, who where you've got like Aegon and Aemond, who are like them. Jace is also he thinks much the same way. He's and he's got his own reasons to try and be pushing
Jace is
dragon thing.
He's practical. He's like I would call him a little impetuous, but he's also like I can see where
use the same 2 words for Aemond too, practical and impetuous.
But absolutely, but I can see where Jace is coming from when Rhaenyra takes his idea and starts allowing small folk to ride dragons if the dragons accept them, because
you can definitely understand it.
Well, yeah, that's what makes him feel special. Like, and if we're not special, then what are we doing? They're not going to let us rule them,
But they so subtly, the creators of this show, create those parallels between Jace specifically and Aegon and Aemond, because then Jace devolves into this thinking of like, yes, it is a birthright, and I know this, and I'm going to push it. And that's the same kind of thinking. And later he says, this is war. People are going to die. So get on your dragon, And it's the same kind of like, that's just inevitably, I think, maybe what the Hightower Targaryen boys are also kind of thinking. They just have a different way of saying it because they're the ones in the Red Keep. And they are not burdened by the Song of Ice and Fire, like Jace is. So whether he believes it or not, I think just the way that they've written it, I don't mind so much anymore that it was kind of slower and maybe not what people were expecting, but in terms of like character writing and being very careful and using subtlety to make parallels and progress the story forward, I thought was really, really interesting. I really enjoyed it. And if you could get me to empathize and really like that scene with Kristen Cole, then I think they did their job.
Absolutely. And that was, a big thing about Game of Thrones. Like, sure, there are certainly some characters that you could point to and say he's the bad guy, but like for the most part, it's like they live in a violent, terrible world, and a lot, like there's everyone lives in a gray area, and most of them are, they're trying to protect what's theirs. They're trying to protect their family. Like they have a motivation that, especially when we're talking about the big houses, like these are lords and ladies and rich folk, and they're ultimately a number of them are after what's best for themselves. But that's certainly not always the case. It's just there's good and bad to everybody, even the characters that we're closest to and that we empathize with the most.
Yeah. I really liked it. It grew on me. I liked the beginning of the season, I think probably the best. I think it moved the best. But as like a whole, and not just like the confusions around the finale as a whole, I think season 2 is really strong.
I totally agree. Adam, any
great.
any thoughts about Kristen Cole or some other? Who's your favorite character this season?
Waiting on that one. Oh God, I'll get back to you on favorite character. But
Yeah.
The Kristen Cole moment. I was thinking about that because they did a really good job trying to make you feel empathetic towards Kristen Cole. It felt to me it's kind of the my name is Jamie moment from Game of Thrones, because when Brienne keeps calling him Kingslayer and he goes, my name is Jamie, and it's like you finally hear his side of the story from like killing the Mad King. You're like, that's what they kind of tried to do with Kristen Cole, except like if you roll it back and you look at why is Kristen Cole an asshole, and the answer is because Rhaenyra told him no. It's really hard to actually be empathetic with him because he's just a kid. And like this entire season was like, I'm gonna be a prime absolute douchebag, and I'm gonna take an army. But then when somebody drops a nuke in front of me on my army, and I realize how worthless I actually am, I'm just gonna slow motion fall for the last 5 episodes of the season and wind up going, man, I wish life didn't suck. And that's like, the scene was great, and I love what they did with it. But I still can't feel empathetic about Kristen Cole.
Yeah, I mean, he now just believes that he and everyone he knows are just all going to burn to death. So it's just like he's doing his duty. He's just not happy about it.
He had his Oppenheimer moment.
Yeah,
it's not I am become death. It's like dragons are death.
We've given the war to the dragons, and now there's nothing we can do to stop it. Like.
Which I think as a whole was something they did really well at the start of this season, because you've got the Targaryens, and like everybody else is like war, we should fight war, except like Otto Hightower, who served 3 kings, all of them Targaryens, and then all the Targaryens are like, no, we need to like pump the brakes and like try to resolve this without. And what it is, it's a cold war, because it's a conflict between 2 countries with nukes, and it's like who's going to hit the red button first. And it's something that you don't see in fantasy, because usually in fantasy it's like, okay, go raid the other town. They'll raid us back. It's fine. People die. Yay, swords. But when you have a dragon, it's like, no, once you unleash this, the world is going to burn.
You can't put the dragon back in the box.
Right, exactly. Yeah, once you hit the button.
And there's the
Dracarys.
In episode 5, the Dracarys. There's some interesting things about there's a lot of interesting commentary about the dragons and how the small folk perceive them. But before I want to loop back around to another thing first. While we were talking about Kristen Cole, here in the last episode, we have another moment with Alicent and Rhaenyra face to face, and they're talking, and Rhaenyra is like, "What are you doing here? What? Just shut up and go away." And then Alicent, she's just trying to explain her side of the story, and eventually they used to be really good friends. So she hears her out. not do they have a moment, but there is a moment where she mentions having taken a lover, and then Rhaenyra pokes at her. It's like, oh, the virtuous queen has taken a lover. That's that's not right. And that, like, there's a little hidden eye because she doesn't say who it is, and there's some little hidden irony there because Rhaenyra has also had her fling with Kristen Cole, so it's I don't know, it's just like, I guess more than anything else, I was like, oh, hey, they're trying to some subtle writing is trying to tell me something here.
Does Allison know about that? Did they ever address that? Does Allison know?
I don't think so. Not as far as I recall.
I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah. And Rhaenyra has had her she's had a complicated relationship with a lot of men. That whole thing where she was flirting with her uncle during her marriage ceremony to her cousin. Like it's a storied history for a lot of people in the show. There's a lot of incest among the Targaryens, among the yellow-haired. What do you say?
Targaryens.
Yeah, good times. So. Yes, what I was talking about before.
I love that scene though when Alicent went to Dragonstone to plead with Rhaenyra, because it was a mirroring of the same
earlier in the season. Yeah,
earlier in the season when Rhaenyra went to the Sept and pleaded with Alicent, and they switched roles. It was great.
And Alicent is realizing that she was wrong this whole time, and that she gave the power to her petulant children who are just gonna kill thousands.
The scene at the council when she tries to say, make me queen regent, and everybody goes, nah, man, we're fighting this war because we don't want a woman in charge, and she just goes,
oh. So we're talking about dragons for a minute there, and what happens when you unleash the dragons. The show also gives some interesting commentary on what happens when dragons fall. And there's this, they have this victory parade. The Greens, after is it Rook's Rest? Is that the name of it? The big dragon battle in episode 4. Let's talk about that first. Where it starts out as a foot battle, and then Princess Rhaenys comes out on her dragon Melees and starts burning the front line, and then Aemond flies out on Vhagar, who is enormous and terrifying, and they. Hundreds die in horrific flames. And then it was a misunderstanding, wasn't it? What the moment where Aegon decides to go out on his dragon, like this, wasn't that
it's him being impetuous youth.
Yes.
And he's drunk.
And okay, yeah. So anyway,
and literally, it was after his mom walked him in the room and said, "You're being an idiot. Shut up and do what you're supposed to do." Nothing. And then he's like, "But war."
Okay, and like. We've
fun if you have a dragon. That's his point of view.
We're saying a lot of bad things about this guy because he's young and he's an idiot, but like he's in a highly emotional state because they did murder his son. They murdered his infant.
Bad things about this character because he's a little dipshit.
That's true. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just like he's like obviously in an emotional state because they sawed off his infant son's head, and that would probably mess up a lot of people.
Not confirmed on the show yet that it's actually his son.
That's true. But
that's a fan theory.
But who else would it have been though? Like if we and I asked because we don't get a lot of time. Well, we don't get a lot of time with Helena, right? Well, like Helena gave birth to the kid, right? But like who has she been sleeping with if not Aegon? And because we don't have a lot of time with her. So this is interesting. This is the first time I've heard of this. Expound.
It's a fan theory.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the show, it's assumed that Jacaerys, that's his name, right? Same Jaehaerys.
Jaehaerys was the infant. Jacaerys is Rhaenyra's son, and this is the naming convention for Targaryens drives everyone crazy.
It's assumed that I know. It's assumed that Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, the girl, the twins, are Aegon's children with Helena. But there's a moment in season 1 where they say word father or something in the presence of these two toddlers. And they say, Aemond. And that's where people get, or they think they do. It's, I don't remember if that was in the captions actually of the show, but people think it sounds like the kids say Aemond after, they hear the word father.
Well, I mean,
people think that maybe it's one of those like reveal things that'll come up on the show that's not necessarily in this unreliable source of the book. That they are Aemond's children, but we can't know that for sure.
I definitely think it would be possible for like Aegon to have had illegitimate children. Like when he finds out Viserys dies, they find him passed out in a brothel, like under a table. So it's Aegon liked to have a good time before all of this mess, and that could have led to things. But this is interesting. I'll have to go back and watch.
Yeah.
So part of it. Go ahead.
No, you go. You know more.
I was gonna say from my understanding, the fan theory is also built on that at least in season 1, Aemond is much kinder to Helena than Aegon is. I think the same is not true in this season, and I think that kind of
Aemond isn't nice to anybody
as a potential.
Well, yeah, it's
he's nicer to Helena than Aegon is in season 1.
And Helena's one of the few people in the Targaryen family who says anything that makes sense. She's like one of the most sensible ones.
but she's half mad.
Yeah.
By the accounts of of Westeros.
Where was I? Well, they're all crazy because they're all results of multiple generations of incest.
I think also like Aegon when the prince is killed, Aegon is the one who flies into a rage, and Aemond is rightfully angry. But I think if it was Aemond's son, Aemond would be even angrier.
Likely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and I think like he goes off the handle quite a bit in this season. And it's like everything that he perceives to be like against the family just kind of like escalates everything more and more. See where people would think that this would come through and be more of a plausible theory. And if you want to read it that way, Aemond definitely looks more empathetic. But whether you can or can't, I don't know. That would be one of those things that if it's revealed later on that was true, then you could see or go rewatch these episodes in a new light.
I agree. And I think that Aemond is more dangerous than Aegon ever was. Because Aegon's a whiny little boy, and Aemond, while obviously not a good person, is much more practical and educated, and he has a better understanding of what's actually happening, and all of that combined with an inferiority complex because Aegon has always bullied him, even though Aegon is half his size. It's a complicated sibling relationship. Yes, and that's the and I will add that there is a moment of respect that Aegon shows Aemond, where he's like, here he's asking for advice, where And it's all right. Well, for screw all of you, I'm going to ask Aemond because he's my closest relative and he's the best fighter we have. There's a brief moment of respect, and maybe he was just making fun of him or putting on a show in front of the council because, like, we know with the scenes that take place in the brothel and stuff, like what their relationship's actually like. But it's all very complicated. And that was a long tangent talking about how and why Aegon decided to climb on a dragon, which was not part of the plan. But Aegon just thinks because he's the king, he can do whatever he wants. And as Adam said, war is fun.
When you have a dragon.
When you have a dragon, war is fun because all the people on the ground are all dying, but you're up here where it's safe.
Yeah, the other people don't have the asterisks. War is fun if you have a dragon, asterisks, and they don't.
And they don't. But what if your brother has a dragon and sets you aflame too?
Yeah, but that was only convenient because they had a dragon.
Well, so yeah, this the big turning point
Also,
in the
not in the history book.
Big turning point in the middle of the season is this battle at the Rook's Rest, where Aegon flies out on his dragon, and everyone's like, "This is the plan, the king. What's happening right now?" And then Kristen Cole's like, "Fuck no!" So yes, there's a big aerial battle between Vhagar and Meleys primarily, and Aegon is just there, kind of annoying both of them. And then Aemond gets in a struggle with Rhaenys and Meleys, and Aemond orders Vhagar to fire breath on both of them. Aegon is severely burned, and ultimately Vhagar and Meleys get into it again, and Vhagar tears off Meleys' head, and this is when we lose Rhaenys in a big dramatic blaze of glory, and then we find. Kristen goes and finds Aegon like barely alive in the dirt next to his dragon. And where I was going with this big loop around was, like the common folk are rightfully afraid of dragons and what dragons mean and can do to them. Certainly after all the stories of Aegon's conquest, and like these foreigners came over and took over because they had some dragons, and there's literally nothing we can do to stop them. So they have this.
That's a little disingenuous. I mean, they do a pretty good job at the start of the season. It's not just, oh, they have dragons, we can't do anything. At least by the time you hit the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryens are revered as almost demigods because they can ride dragons.
And that's a thing that Jace was talking about. Like, it's my birthright to be able to do this. So if you're giving it to anybody, then we're not special anymore. And that ties gently into what I'm about to say is. Kristen Cole has this big victory parade where he takes the severed head of Meleys, who's Rhaenys' dragon, and parades it through the street. And like ultimately everyone, it's probably kind of a bad idea. Like, okay, it's an enemy dragon has fallen, but they're not invincible. Is this where we're relying on dragons to protect us? Are we not safe? What's happening? So that it creates some unrest among the small folk in King's Landing, and that's combined with the fact that Rhaenyra and the sea snake Corlys Valerian. They've organized a blockade and are preventing food and from getting into King's Landing. So it's the small folk are kind of they're starving, and there's a lot of unrest and that kind of thing. And then and that leads to Rhaenyra sending small boats with food and supplies and stuff for the small folk. So it's the Greens are beginning to lose grip on the public opinion, which is ultimately probably not a good thing for them. And as I'm kind of beating through each episode here, if there's anything that comes to mind, please speak up. really interesting stuff between, Corlys and Adam of Hull, who is actually Corlys's bastard son. And it's there, before we lose Rhaenys, there's actually a moment that kind of makes it seem like she knows. But there is some very interesting back and forth between them. He's a shipwright or something like that. He works on the docks as they're preparing to go to war, and he keeps having these conversations with Corlys because when Corlys when Corlys went down last season, he's the one who drug him out of the water. So like I really liked Adam of Hull. It's a really interesting character, and I loved at the end where it's like, I lived my whole life without you. I don't need you now. Thanks, bye.
Is that Adam of Hull or the other one? Because I thought Adam
That's
was the
Adam.
one that-
The other one is Alan.
Alan, wait, oh, holy crap. Alan's the guy I'm talking about. You're absolutely right. Okay. This is what I get for skimming. Alan is the shipwright guy. Adam of Hull is the one who finds and befriends the dragon. Okay. All the names are...
The dragon finds and befriends him.
Yes. And so that...
Which, by the way, I noticed something, like, one of my favorite design choices, and I can only assume that it was done intentionally, is through the entire season, you have Alan of Hull shaving his head because he has the white hair and he's trying to hide his parentage because he wants nothing to do with it. Meanwhile, you have Adam of Hull who doesn't have the white hair, but wants part of that glory, and his hair is huge. And that metaphor struck me, and I was like, I don't know if that's intentional, but it should be, because that's brilliant.
Yeah. I also really like how they use those two brothers in different ways to like show different sides of Corlys as well, especially after Rhaenys dies, because he's going back and forth between two places, and we know that the Velaryon house doesn't exist in the events of Game of Thrones. So he's like towing the line between these two things, and it's like possible futures and who is where. And
that's an interesting point. I will follow that up with Jace and Luke, whom we've already lost. Their last name is Valerian, and we don't have any Valerians later. So I'm not spoiling. I'm just pointing out some things that there might be some more death.
George Martin, everybody dies.
It's true. If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.
Yeah, so I enjoyed that a lot, but I was very interested in how people were reacting to Daemon being at Harrenhal for most of the season, because it seemed like there was a lot of negativity around that, but I found that to be one of the most interesting parts of the season.
I agree, and again, I would
My wife could stand it. She was tired of him sitting there slowly going insane for the entire show. I loved it because while it's not in the books, or at least in the book he just goes to Harrenhal and raises an army and lickety split, it's done. Yeah, just like that. But I liked it because, especially with the payoff that we get at the end,
yes,
it is a complete reversal of the character who he is. So I think we needed that much time to see him become a different person, and he did it in a very unconventional way. But if he'd just gone there and then been like, "Oh, by the way, yeah, you're my queen,"
like people would. But I mean, based on the setup that we've seen, like we would continue to suspect treachery from him. But I also feel like there's a moment last season where he just, he commits to Rhaenyra, and then this season he's back to, what if I was king? You can just call me king. That's cool.
I think they touch on that this season in that, like, he committed to Rhaenyra because it made him king, not because he actually committed to Rhaenyra.
That's a fair and important distinction. And I as it was going on, I like would probably agree. It's like he's just in Harrenhal again. And again, like I love some of that material. Like I like Simon Strong, who's just like having to put up with Damon and Damon's nonsense. But it's like the Alice Rivers character is really interesting.
I think the most exciting
Alice Rivers is fascinating.
Yeah.
Really cool, but I think the most like exciting and like I didn't see it coming and like where's this going scene all season for me was the one with Oscar Tully.
Yeah,
with
with
all the River Lords come together, and that scene was so well done. Like on all fronts, I was just like, this is like ensemble acting right here. It was great.
that kid has he's got a mean streak for sure. He's like a very good understanding of what his people need, first of all, which is what any good lord needs, but also he's like kind of ruthless, which is surprising from someone so young. People said the same thing about Bella Ramsey's character in Game of Thrones.
Lyanna Mormont.
Yes. Inheriting a lordship at such a young age, just because that's how it works. It's often I can see that probably going poorly for a lot of houses. But yeah, like
What would you really call him? Like, what do you? Is it really brutality, or is it really a brutal streak, though, or are we just saying that because he's a kid and we're not expecting it?
I mean, maybe
if he was a grown man and he was like, yeah, this dude murdered a bunch of people and he did it on your order, so if you want us to follow you, you've got to make up for it. Like, if that had come from, like, Robert Baratheon 200 years later, we'd have been like, oh, yeah, no, Robert's a badass. But because it's coming from a kid, you're like, oh, no, this kid's a little mean.
I think the thing, though, about it is that they fake... I saw a breakdown or something where they were talking about the possibility of how Alice Rivers may have influenced him or coached him on how to deal with Damon and everything ahead of his grandfather dying, because they say, Simon Strong says, like, our best healer, Alice Rivers, went to go see what she could do, and there was nothing to be done. And it's insinuated by Damon's reaction that, like, maybe she just, like, put this old man out of his misery. But at the same time, she would have been, in contact with this kid and maybe, like, moving some chess pieces around and coaching him. And that's what I heard of the people saying. And I was like, oh, well, there's something here, because in the very first episodes, he seems very kind of like unsure and like trying to get his feet, grounded. And I don't know what to think about that. It's an interesting character development to go from like the first episode where he doesn't seem quite sure and maybe needs some coaching to that scene. But then looking back, he was already very like set on how to deal with Damon in his own way. He was like, I'm not the lord of these lands yet, so let's reconvene later. And like even then, like even though like he seems like he's like not knowing what's going on, he's very self-assured in that, and who wouldn't be intimidated to meet Damon for the first time? So I just think like that whole character of Oscar Tully is really, really interestingly written. And
I totally agree. And you make a good point. Like Damon has a reputation for, at best having a short fuse, at worst being violent, so that we don't have a lot of time to reflect on that stuff this season, but that was his whole thing in the first season, is like Damon's unpredictable.
I think we spent the entire season dealing with that, because that's the problem with Damon and the Riverlands, is that the Riverlands don't respond well to that. Like that's why, first meeting,
yeah.
I didn't expect them to die so willingly. And, he didn't kill them, but you have them turning around and walking away from Caraxes, and it looks like Caraxes is about to burn somebody, and but then they didn't. He was like, okay, that didn't work. I couldn't just punch them in the face and say follow me, which works for most people, but these people are ain't gonna work here. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Harrenhal was. The whole season is him going. It's the tighter I squeeze, the less these people listen to me. How do I deal with that? And the truth is, like, well, let me show you why you don't matter in the future, and then that's why you'll learn to do it the right way.
Diplomacy, not intimidation. And Damon is better at one of those things than the other, and it's usually not. It's not the one. Yeah.
And like the people of the Riverlands have never responded well to might and dragons. That's why Harrenhal is Harrenhal.
Because it was melted.
Like, yeah, because Harren the Black was like, no, I'm not going to talk to dragons, and they were like, all right, nuke.
So, is Harrenhal where, what's his name, Ron Rhaenyra's children's father? What was his name?
Harwin Strong.
Harwin. Is that where he died? I couldn't put those pieces together. He died at Harrenhal.
Yep, and that's why. Yeah, and that's why when Daemon first gets there, and the steward says, "Oh, they died in a fire," which is weird because there hasn't been a fire here since the dragons burned it because it's always wet. Like, okay,
Right. I wanted to know, maybe they will leave this entirely up to the viewer, but all of those different myths around Harrenhal are so intriguing, and maybe it's my projection, but I love the idea of Harwin Strong haunting this place. And being really specific about how to get Daemon on Rhaenyra's side and playing some kind of weird, strong family juju on this whole situation. Because it just plays into these themes of and allegiance and vision and lineage and all that kind of stuff. So that's my fan theory. That Harwin Strong is at least a little bit petty towards Daemon. But I would have liked to see more of that mythology in the show. And I thought they started to bring it in really well at Harrenhal, but I think there's a lot more of that mythological skepticism on the Hightower side versus the Black side, and how religious are they and are they not, and what are they buying into, old ways and new ways. That was such a theme on Game of Thrones itself that I hope that they continue to make some of those comments, because I think bringing in more of the mysticism, since we are in the past in the Game of Thrones timeline, would be a different kind of inclusion to bring into the show that hasn't quite been in it yet.
I agree. Magic was present in Game of Thrones, but magic in this world is very subtle. And it's if we're talking about a historical account, as whether or not this is the way things actually happened, if it's somebody, and not to say that it's been framed this way in the show at all, but if it's somebody telling these stories, it might be a little more supernatural than it actually was, or maybe they're even downplaying that kind of mysticism stuff, and it was more so that's an interesting place to explore. Are we looking at events as they actually happened? Because we know magic exists, right? And it certainly affects people, and there have been individuals known to predict the future or to see certain things that may or may not have actually happened, or and there in Game of Thrones there was some kind of magic or something surrounding Daenerys in particular, she's fireproof and none of the other Targaryens are, so there was certainly something special about her. And then, the prince that was promised, that was previous before the vision that Daemon has. Everyone kind of assumed that was Jon Snow, because Jon Snow is a distant, a descendant of Targaryens. the vision here kind of implies the vision that Daemon has implies that it was Daenerys.
Well, and as Jaehaerys says, like the old Valyrian word for prince and princess are very similar. It's the same reason that when he's on his deathbed, he's saying, "No, it's probably is Rhaenyra. You're right. I've been worried about it being a prince this whole time." But no, the words are probably the same. You know, it's the same word. Well, I mean, just extrapolate that out. The same thing is then true when you get down to Daenerys.
Well, they even talked about that Game of Thrones itself. You know, this is a neutral gendered word.
Mhm.
It doesn't hold a gender. So, and then everybody just assumed through the way that it was shot and, you know, what it jumps to, like that jump cut to little baby Jon Snow, the prince that was promised. Like, yeah, of course. But, you know, like that's also just one part of the lore. And I for me, watching Game of Thrones, the possibility of it being Dany never went away. So I enjoyed that they brought that back around this time.
Sure. No,
Because
it's
they're Targaryens. Like everybody that's going through this, like at that point in Daemon's vision, Helena is in charge, right?
Mhm.
Because it goes from Daenerys to the throne room, seeing Rhaenyra, and then there's Helena. So of course the Targaryens are seeing Targaryens and what they recognize as Targaryens. So yeah, like why wouldn't Helena be like, that's the one?
And I think it's important that we as an audience are seeing it with the knowledge that what he sees is true. Because so often, like in media, you're like, oh, I had a vision. It's like, oh, it could be true. Maybe it isn't true. But I think by us knowing that what he's seen is factually the future, we can extrapolate from that he accepts it as true. In a way that if it was just, oh, I saw a future and I know you're the right queen, might not be as strong.
Yeah, which again, I think that is another thing that creates bias from the writers' room, right? Because they're saying this is Team Black and the Greens are not a thing, and that's very interesting thinking about their promotional marketing campaign where they had like Greens or Blacks around
Yep.
the world. So I think Team Black is definitely like where the show leads for sure, and just very interesting to see those things come out.
Well, at least so far for the first 2 seasons, Team Black are the ones who are trying to uphold the status quo. Team Green are the ones who are trying to, and we know this, overthrow it. Like, Alicent is painted as a villain, but part of that is due to just our own viewer bias because we know that it was a mistake from the moment it happened. Whereas Alicent doesn't know it's a mistake. And no matter how much you try to paint that as a character, we'll always know that it was a mistake. So, of course, that makes her, in some ways, the villain because
Sure.
she's trying to overthrow. Meanwhile, everybody else in the council is a villain because they're just like, nah, dicks are better.
Oh, I had a branching point to make. It's now gone. I know. We so the season wraps up. Oh, well, we talked a lot about the blacks trying to gain favor among the other houses. The Greens are trying to do that too. So they actually go to Essos and they're trying to get they're trying to gain favor among the free cities across the ocean, because because the Greens they have houses aligned with them. They don't have much of a navy, and that's part of why it was so easy for Rhaenyra and Corlys to blockade King's Landing, but. So there's all that going around, and the people across the sea. First of all, I love Tywin Lannister. He's just like, he's just kind of,
What?
no, like, yeah, he's just like, what the fuck is happening? It's just like, and Admiral Lohar is amazing, and he's just like, all right, the way that we're gonna, she's like, the way that we're gonna figure this out is the way that I'm gonna respect you is you got to beat me in a wrestling match. It's just like it's
mud wrestling match.
yeah, it's no, it's just it's very goofy, but it's like it's very different than the way that that people in Westeros handle things. Obviously, so like that's no, it's just a very cool, very amusing reactions from Thailand. And also, I want to point out.
That,
Go ahead. No, please.
that actor just does the two roles of those Lannister brothers so well. And I hope that he gets more material to work with in the next season, because he is just like, he does the dramatic, but he has these like really specific, like barely comedic moments that are just so pleasurable to watch. So I hope
How
he
many
gets
wives
some more.
do you have?
How many wives do you have? He's so funny. Even in the council meetings, he's like, like I don't know what I'm doing here. And then he's like, okay, great, I get to get out of here away from these crazy people for like 2 seconds. I'm gonna go do my job. And he's like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm looking forward to more Lannister brothers, which I never.
Yeah, and it's like he's nothing like Tywin from Game of Thrones. It's just like, and it's just So I guess we're kind of predisposed to expect a certain thing if we hear house names that we know, and Thailand is not like that. Like they're still rich, right? They have they have the gold mine, but it's like, this is I don't know what I'm doing here. These people are crazy. Two more characters that I want to talk about. We didn't get much Otto Hightower this season. With like in fucking Otto. Like I love to hate him so much. Risa Fons is amazing. But we find early in the season, Aegon dismisses him as the Hand. And he picks Kristen Cole of all fucking people, but no, yeah. So then Otto kind of disappears for several episodes. He comes up at the end of, or he comes up right near the end of episode 8, and he's in prison. So maybe that's why we haven't heard from him, or like there was along the way. There's mention of I've written letters to him, but none. He hasn't responded. So Otto's locked up for some reason. So that's fun. I want to.
Who do we think has him locked up? I heard different theories. What do you guys think?
A lot of different things too. It could be. Well, Adam, you go first.
I'm not sure. I've been trying to think about it, because that differs starkly from Fire and Blood. Because in Fire and Blood, he is not locked up and is leading most of the armies around the Reach and the Riverlands. So he's still like doing his thing. He isn't. So who locked him up? I don't know. Probably Larys Strong.
I mean, I was thinking probably Larys too. That's what but like I don't. There isn't enough information like to really decide. So it's. I mean, well, that's obviously intentional, but it's just kind of a.
I mean, and obviously he's been locked up for a long time, because like Alicent talks early in the season about how he's not responding to letters, and they're he must be busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, or maybe he was captured on the road. He could be captured on the road and be held by, I don't know, the Tullys or somebody. Who knows?
That
doesn't seem like something the Tullys would do. That
he's in the hands of Daemon, and that would be interesting. Because I think it's significant that like there's a torch holding fire in that last shot. So if that fire is indicating Targaryen, I don't know, but that would be very interesting. I heard a theory that it's Helena. I know, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how much
I mean,
can't buy that one.
Helena doesn't have the clout because nobody respects women.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
And why would... That's confusing. What
I know.
what motivation would Helena have to that's her grandfather. Like
I know.
yeah.
I
Laris,
think
sure,
there would have to
even
be some kind of prophetic thing for Helena to be like, gotta lock him up. She'd be like, I've seen it.
one more character I want to ask about, Miss Saria, who last season Damon was kind of using her as a resource, and then she was locked up, and he promised that she would eventually be set free, and then Rhaenyra was like, yeah, we're not going to do that, and then Rhaenyra comes back and lets her go, and she becomes an advisor for Rhaenyra, and she's like one of the smartest people on the show,
and saves everybody from the Eric and Eric plot.
yeah. No, she's a very very
That was
interesting.
another great scene. The Eric and Eric fight. That was another
Oh yeah, the Eric and Eric.
hard-hitting.
Yeah,
Oh God, that was so. I loved to hate to watch that.
Yes, just twins killing each other.
Misaria is so interesting though because she obviously is like Team Black. She's like, I think this is the best way out of it. I think she's kind of the Littlefinger character, a little bit Littlefinger, a little bit.
I totally agree. Yep.
And what's the other guy that, like, the Master of Whispers?
Larry Strong.
No. In Game of Thrones.
Oh, Varys.
Varys. She gives me Littlefinger and Varys vibes together. And I love how they made her backstory more of a part of, you can look back on season 1 differently now, knowing more about her.
Sure.
And I think that she's going to end up doing things that people don't totally agree with. She's going to have really good reasons for doing them. That's just my character prediction based off of just how they're presenting her this season. She's so interesting. I like that character a lot, mostly because I think espionage is probably my favorite genre to explore, because it still confuses me. I'm like, anything could happen. So I'm excited to see where that goes for her. But I'm really confused about Rhaena. Those girls just kind of bopping around the Vale. Doesn't really know how to survive on her own. She's doing a little bit of Bear Grylls kind of journey out there, and then that's all we get from her. Yeah, I'm just I don't know how well this storyline was conceived. At least not for 8 episodes. I feel like that is what we would have got more of out of 2 more episodes.
Right.
Well, I loved the beginning of that where she's sent to the Vale and they're like, we told you we'd give you dragons. Here's dragons, and the lady of the Vale's like, okay, I'm not playing this game. It was Rhaenyra trying to play the overly obvious, no, we kept our part of the bargain, but it's her story trying to find the dragon is interesting because it seems to be replacing a different character from Fire and Blood. So we'll see where that goes.
I've heard a lot of people be very upset about that. And I understand why, if you've got a really great character that people really like and then all of a sudden it's not there. But couldn't they still bring that character in some way? Because of the stories, if they're not reliable.
They could. It's just, it'll be interesting how they do it. And I think part of it is, I don't even know why people like the character that well, because it's a history novel. You're like, oh, here's this character, they did thing. So you don't get any really great in-depth things with the character. But the character in question inevitably ends up with Daemon, which would just be extra weird if that happened here, but also not off-brand for Targaryens.
Yeah, true.
What about
that was the worst part of the season for me, was poor Rhaena. I feel really bad for that actress.
Hey, I just want her to get a dragon.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that dragon. Looks crazy. It's like feral and like I guess they clip wings or something. It's like they're I don't know. It's just it's obviously very different than the ones that are kept by that are domesticated, or like I don't know if domesticated.
Depending on which one of the riderless dragons it's supposed to be, checks out.
It's sheep stealer, but yeah, it's.
Do we know for sure that it's sheep stealer? Because it looked more like the way cannibal was described.
Oh, maybe. I don't. Okay.
I mean, what it was doing, I would think it was sheep stealer, but at least design-wise, which they've differed. I mean, yeah, but because cannibal was supposed to be like this weird, gnarly-looking black dragon.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean the dragons, like they probably differ from the text a lot more than what it's, because they have to be different enough that we can tell them apart, especially when there's more than one on screen at a time. So like, and
they go for the kind of the Game of Thrones-y wyvern look, whereas the descriptions in the novels are much more classic Dungeons and Dragons.
That's true. Yeah.
Like very colorful scales. Like Moon Dancer is green with pearlescent wings and horns, like very bright and vibrant. And they're like, no, we got to make this look more like an actual animal for the TV show.
I guess it could look kind of silly compared to some other stuff. Oh God, which tab am I on?
Yeah. I mean, Caraxes looked silly, and I thought Caraxes was dumb until
the long neck is weird.
Kick ass, and then I was like, no. Yeah. Well, Caraxes was deformed, but it's never really specified how it's deformed. Well, now we know it's serpentine.
Interesting.
Which is cool, though.
Yeah,
sure. It looks kind of weird, but cool.
Well, and in one of the post episodes, Matt Smith even said he's deformed and just kind of weird, and that makes him edgy, like Damon.
Edgy. Yeah, that's the word we'll use for Damon. Edgy.
Okay, so there's another beat that Katy wants to talk about. Any other notes about specific episodes or characters before we move to Katy's big question here?
Forward to watching the season back, like in order. I rewatched the finale, but I think once people rewatch season 2, I think they'll end up liking it more and seeing more of the threads. At least that's my hope. I think my friend told me that she thought that season 1 was like one of the strongest seasons out of all of Game of Thrones.
I would agree with that.
I would too. And I think that because of that, season 2 seems like less in comparison. But I think in the context of all of these themes that we've talked about and the characters and the way that they're treated and what's to look forward to, and the emphasis not being so much on action, but on actual like articulation is, I think that can be more appreciated.
We're talking about like maybe being a little disappointed we didn't get a battle or some big reveal at the end, but like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon have always been at the strongest when it's small groups of characters talking to each other. Like that's when it's always been the best. Yeah,
that's what I wanted to bring it back to, is like this season felt more like Game of Thrones in a way that season 1 couldn't, because season 1 happened over 30 years. So like you can't have those little intricate moments and slight misunderstandings, because you got to carry the ball of, okay, I have to explain to you why the Targaryens were a great dynasty and why everybody thinks this way and why a girl's going to be in charge, but why everybody hates that a girl's going to be in charge, and then why there's this misunderstanding and why all these kids are dipshits. And like there's a lot that season 1 had to do, so it was much faster paced. Which at the time I remember a lot of people complaining about that it seemed to go too fast, because you'd have like a 10-year time jump.
Right. I mean, and that may
what?
It may be this season may be a response to some of that, and that's people never going to be happy.
But I think like season 1, again, it had a lot of work to do to get you up to understand not just the motives of all the characters, because you could have had season 1 just be like the 6 months before Jaehaerys dies, and you could just say all of why it's important. But it was better to show it, because also what you're showing is This is the Targaryen dynasty. It is something that we did not see in Game of Thrones. It's gone. Robert erased it. He took the dragons out of the hall. They removed most of the Iron Throne. Like, he did everything he could to wipe out any trace of the Targaryens from public view. And so part of what season 1 had to do was say, this is the dynasty that we're talking about. And that gives more weight to when it all crumbles. But that also means when it starts to crumble, nobody wants it to crumble. Like, this is a big deal. These are the guys that have been in charge for 100 years, and they're in charge because they have dragons, and this is terrifying if we go to war. So I think the strength of season 2 was having the patience to be patient and take it one step at a time. Because again, it's supposed to be a slower age where things don't happen very quickly. That was one of the complaints with the end of Game of Thrones, was like you had 6 seasons of things building up and then suddenly everything happened at the end of Game of Thrones. And now people are complaining that this season went a little too slow. And I find it an interesting, duality that people seem. I mean, I guess maybe there's, I don't know. People are weird. I've been a nerd my whole life. Nerds are weird.
People are weird. Social media is weird. Twitter is an uninhabitable hellscape. Good times. So yeah, but before we wrap up, Katy proposed a big question here before we started. What is cinematic television? And that I think that's an interesting approach, or an interesting thing to say. What I think cinematic television is. Has anyone watched The Bear on Hulu? That's cinematic television.
It's too stressful.
It's so good. The Bear is more stressful than Game of Thrones, or than House of the Dragon. No one gets violently murdered or burned to death in The Bear.
Everyday things that would absorb into your own day and your own experience that I can't deal with.
So, Adam,
it's the same reason that Dolores Umbridge is more terrifying than Voldemort.
Yeah. But what is it about The Bear that you would think would be cinematic, or what is and isn't cinematic in House of the Dragon compared?
Oh, I don't mean to say that House of the Dragon is not either, and it's a different conversation too. Everything has budgets. With a show like House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones, right? The money's on the screen. There all of these costumes and elaborate locations and dragons, that all of that stuff costs money to produce. It also takes a certain it takes a skill to be able to frame these things. Picturing a dragon that isn't there, getting it the right, knowing where it's going to be on camera so that it can interact with human beings. Or, that's an entirely different skill than having 2 people talking and keeping that interesting and doing so for a 50-minute episode of television, right? Because like I said a few minutes ago, this season and Game of Thrones are both at its best when it's 2, maybe 3 people talking to each other. But if you have a lot of that, you have to, in order to keep it visually interesting, that takes that takes a certain talent that is different than making romantic comedies, whatever. And I don't mean to denigrate the movies like that, but it's a different. The things that keep you interested are not the same, and often they're very visual. And I would certainly say that some episodes do it better than others. And that's the case with any television show, and that has to do with the way television is made. You have a showrunner and producers who've kind of set up the framework for how we do things, and then a director comes in and kind of executes stuff. But you can tell that when a character is supposed to seem strange or is supposed to seem like nervous or insignificant or to feel uncomfortable in a scene, they might appear smaller or in certain parts of the frame or, like things like that. Or they might flip that backwards where everyone is looking down on, is it Oscar? Oscar Strong. What's the kid's name?
Tully.
Oscar Tully. Yes. Everyone's looking down on him because he's he's young and they don't expect him to have a lot to say. And the angles of him are very high. And that's, often
in the Godswood.
Yes, like if you're trying to make someone seem insignificant, you might shoot them from high angles looking down on them, but instead he's a strong, self-assured character, but they're shooting him looking down because that's how other people perceive him. That's how the other characters in the scene who are all grown men who most of whom have seen armed conflict at some point or another. So it's like, what is cinematic? It's about making those choices is what I would say, and because like it's very easy to film two people sitting down having a conversation and if the writing's good, that might be enough, but it's not, visually interesting necessarily. Whereas if you add those little touches, like, I struggle to say point of view because we never go into Damon's eyes looking down on Oscar Tully, but like he's young and he's shorter than everybody else. So it's like kind of that we have a lot of like over the shoulder or, this camera looking down on him. Like, and that is, I guess I'm just thinking about it because it's in the most recent episode, but that's a choice that is given to just like to explain a specific idea that is not in the text. And I think that's what makes movies special. Right. And that kind of thing didn't exist through most of the life of television because television has to, in order to make 22 episodes a season, which is what 70 years of television was, you had to keep up a rhythm and you had to churn it out. And I feel like I've been rambling and you guys are just looking at me nodding, but like, I guess the main thing is, I'm
very interested hearing this, by the way.
Okay.
I've been looking for a book, but I couldn't find it that talks about what we're talking about.
So I guess it's like making a choice. Because I guess you could say, like, if I was talking about a cinematic video game or whatever, like a lot of people would describe that as like something with big set pieces or, and Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon certainly have that. But that isn't necessarily everything. I bring up The Bear, like the first episode of season 3 is nearly 40 minutes long and there's barely any dialogue. It is the main character, his name's Carmine, or his name's Carmen. He's played by, before I look it up, Jeremy Allen White. He was also in Shameless. He's one of the younger brothers in Shameless for a long time. And he is, they're at the end of last season, they were opening a new restaurant. And this season, it's mostly him meditating on cooking in his new restaurant versus time he spent at a very prestigious restaurant in New York City. And it's very fast paced. But like I said, like there's almost no spoken word in 30 plus minutes of television. It's just all him thinking to himself, and it's not narrated, right? We don't hear what he's thinking. We see flashbacks, but like he's obviously, wheels are turning. He's ruminating on specific things for specific reasons, but it's trusting of the audience to understand. We said in an episode last week when we were talking about Deadpool and Wolverine, like you can trust your audience, like they're they're smart. Like you don't need to look down on them. You just but you also don't have to give them all the information, right? So it's finding a balance and it's making a choice. And it's cinema. Cinema is a visual medium. So if the more information you can share visually, I think that's what makes it lean more cinematic. We throw around words like epic all the time. And sure, you could describe House of the Dragon as epic, big landscapes with battles and hundreds of extras and dragons flying around. But certainly that's cinematic, but that's not all that cinematic is, because you could also have a chef alone in a kitchen cutting onions, and it's just as cinematic for completely different reasons. So I think it's about what's the point of this scene, and making a choice about how to show that, as opposed to necessarily telling. Like, it can be in the dialogue, but what else can you do? Did that make sense? I feel like I've rambled for like 5 minutes now. What do you have something in mind when you ask this question? I'm sure you do.
Sorry, it froze there for a second.
Oh, no worries. It's a big question for sure. And I think you have something in mind, either an answer or some way that you think about this.
I do. But is there anything else that you want to add? Before
I don't know.
Or anybody want to add?
Thoughts, Adam?
I mean, I mostly agree with Brandon's points. I think that culturally we often conflate, to use Brandon's terms, like epic with cinematic. Because I think when we say cinematic, we're thinking like, oh, big movie. But there's a distinction between like cinematic and cinema. Like you have movies, and then you have cinema is kind of an artsy way of saying nice movies or fancy movies. And that's what I think Brandon's trying to get at, is like the conscious decision, like with Oscar Tully, when Damon's looking down at him, it's looking down. But when he's out in the Godswood and putting Damon in his place, it's being shot from like his waist, looking up at him, and it's making him a big man now. So like very conscious decisions portraying messages without having to say them.
And and often the audience doesn't even pick up on that stuff, right? If it's good cinematography, and to like, I would say an even greater degree, good editing, which is also like has everything to do with cinematic, is invisible, right? So I devote my life to noticing these things, but the average viewer does not do that. But the average viewer still understands, because like I was saying before, they're smart, and if you give them all the information, they'll figure it out. So it's
well, it's just very interesting, because no matter what, people know that there's a big difference between Friends and House of the Dragon, right? And it's, even though they're both episodic, right? So there's just, it gets more muddied, I think, when you include streaming in that, because then, you could also have movies or films that are cinema and cinematic that are less so than others. Like, I wouldn't call The Lighthouse or The Witch the same thing as Twilight or Deadpool and Wolverine. It's different. So I don't know. I think that people have, and when I say people, I mean people who have written books and gotten PhDs. So there's a distinction there between what's legitimized and not means anything in any way, which it doesn't obviously. So theoretically speaking, in terms of like film theory and the way that people perceive like what is cinematic has gone back and forth, but also it just means that, at least in the age of streaming, it has to kind of be reconsidered, which is something that I'm thinking about a lot. And what does that mean for television? Because for so long, television was its own kind of thing, and you knew what looked and functioned as a film or a piece of cinema or a movie, and what was television. It was very distinct. And it's not so much anymore because we have both going onto one platform or on similar platforms or having similar kinds of access.
They
So
look
that changes it as
similar,
well.
like to the consumer experience when you're surfing. House of the Dragon's on Max, and House of the Dragon comes up basically as a poster, and it could be sitting right next to a feature film, and they look the same, right? And if you click on either one, well, like the art's different, but you know what I mean? Like they're not well differentiated or whatever. It's just the delivery system makes them both kind of like content, which we've discussed on the show before, like content versus cinema. But like so go ahead. No, I was just finishing the point that the delivery system to the consumer is they look the same. There isn't a lot differentiating them because they're just buttons on a screen.
A scholar by the name of Angelo Restivo wrote a really great book called what's it called? It's over there. But basically he wrote it about Breaking Bad and tries to define what cinematic television is. So he uses Breaking Bad as examples. And essentially what he says is it comes down to mise en scène, which is everything that you were saying. It's mise en scène. It's storytelling motivated through mise en scène. And that's the difference between something like Friends and something like Breaking Bad or, any kind of ER and Game of Thrones.
Multi-camera sitcoms versus single-camera dramas.
Yeah, and it's not even the single camera and the multi-camera. I mean,
broadcast versus cable.
Broadcast versus cable is big in that too, but it's also about how are you using that camera, because I mean you could have mise en scène be a big part of this 2-camera sitcom shoot, but how is that motivating the storytelling? It comes down to, at least to him, the way that you use all of the tools available to you to comment on something. So I think your example of The Bear, I haven't seen it, but I would assume that's a really good example. So it's something to think about. And I am wondering about this and the relationship between streaming and cinema. So what does it mean when we say cinematic television? Will we end up saying something like telematic cinema?
Telematic.
I don't know.
Movie shot like Friends.
Yeah, you don't know what'll happen. I mean, we could argue that we already kind of have something like that. If you have so much dialogue that's just shot, reverse shot, isn't that kind of just like a 2-camera?
Well, it's coverage, sitcom? But yeah, that's a good point too. It's like if it looks the same, like why are you shooting it one after the other? It takes the same amount of time to film 8 episodes of House of the Dragon as it would take to do 24 episodes of Friends. Like roughly 9 to 10 months of filming for 8 hours of content versus 15.
Yeah. So it's just an interesting question, and I think it's changing a little bit. And I like the way that this scholar Angelo Restivo talks about it in Breaking Bad. So it's just an interesting question, and I think it has to be reconsidered. And we talk so much about stuff like House of the Dragon, and I think those are very weighty in society, and I think that's the reason why people really enjoyed it in the first place. We've had cinematic television before, like when we were talking before we started recording, Highlander, the TV show was mentioned. And my advisor wrote his first book was called Television in Transition, and he talked about this show as well, and he talks about it in terms of the superhero genre on television and how there's a globalizing Neapolitan force between these gendered commentaries and different action and comic booky TV shows from that time. So there's something there, right? And so looking at the action genre in particular is something interesting, and House of the Dragon is something that's kind of adjacent to that, but not. And in that conversation, like I wouldn't call Breaking Bad an action show, but
I would call it cinematic.
Elements. Exactly. So it's like, what's the balance here? So that's just what I'm thinking. And I wanted to take the opportunity to ask you guys about it, since we talk about a lot of movies together, and some TV shows like House of the Dragon come up here and there. We've talked about The Witcher before, and that has a certain cinematic kind of toes the balance between what we would traditionally think of as television with cinema. And House of the Dragon is definitely very cinematic. So there's just a lot to think about there. And people are doing it really, really well. And television is not what it used to be. Like, we know that for certain. And cinema is still trying to figure it out. So I would not be surprised if we end up having something like telematic cinema. We all coined that.
We just coined a new word.
I did, yeah. We're gonna do that. I'll put it in a footnote in the thing. I'll be like, so I had a conversation on this day, and this is where this came from, and I'm gonna run with it. Thanks, guys.
Any closing thoughts, Adam?
On cinematic television or just House of the Dragon?
All of the above.
Well, while y'all were talking about cinematic television, it made me start thinking, at least in my understanding of it, in my experiencing it, Game of Thrones was one of the turning points when TV, like what we expected from television shows, really changed. Like, I think it was like Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad,
Mad Men,
and Stranger Things. Mad Men. Okay, I didn't watch Mad Men, but yeah,
it's like they're earlier than those other ones.
They're all contemporary. Yeah, they're all contemporary, and they all changed the game with what was expected. But then adding Stranger Things into that, because that was the first show on Netflix, the first full big budget streaming TV show, and I think that's what changed the game. And I was wondering, I'm not a psychologist, so this is my little armchair psychologist, but streaming services are something that we know we pay for. I mean, it's the same reason HBO shows always were higher quality and higher budget than Friends, because it's cable. They have more money, and they have to spend money on it to make it worth the subscription to pay for it. So how much is the culture just changing versus how much does streaming television have to up the game and be more like a movie, something that you typically pay to experience, because we're paying to experience it on streaming?
There's also a question in there about how much television are people actually watching? No, I don't watch television.
Mm-hmm.
And any really traditional television show that I would watch, I watch later. Like, my family really likes the show Ghosts. And what's that on? NBC or?
I'm sorry, what? Say again?
Ghost.
I don't know.
See, you don't even pinpoint at the show.
Yeah, I know it's on one of the podcasts, but I don't know which one. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's a testament to this changing thing of, like, do people even watch television anymore? So then what's competing with what?
Oh, is it like the comedy show where she's in the house with all the dead people?
Yes.
Yeah, I have seen that with Rose McIver. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, like, how much television are people watching? Because even then, if I'm going to go watch that or something like that like airs every week and is in syndication, I personally would go to the website and I would stream it the next time when I have to watch the ads just like normal.
House of the Dragon or like HBO shows are the closest thing I get to like watching as it airs, but I don't watch it on TV, right? When it starts on HBO TV is also when it appears on the app. So I play it on the Max app on my Xbox.
And like, I think the only other show like in syndication that I watch or try to keep up with, like actually, is What We Do in the Shadows. And so that airs at a regular time, new
Right.
episodes and syndication. But it's also on Hulu. So
Mhm.
I just watch it on Hulu.
Yep.
You know? And so I wonder how much television and that kind of tradition of producing television and having to compete between television and like a streamer or cable provider versus cinema, like what that relationship is all like now, because
We could do
I
a
don't watch
whole
television.
like we could do a whole podcast on this topic, but like
I know.
streamers are noticing that streaming as they've conceived it is not good business. Like
It's true.
it's like because they've all been just losing money for years now. Like Disney Plus is only becoming profitable. So it's they're especially now, like with economic downturns and things, they're leading back towards linear programming and ad supported programming and all of the things that we were so happy to be rid of. And they are realizing that is how the model that they've used for 100 years, they were using it for a reason, and it is not perfect, but we were trying to push them to change it.
I don't know. You say the things we were happy to get rid of, and I will disagree with that, because I read a book, just Game of Thrones tidbits, preparing for Game of Thrones trivia a couple months ago. But the author wrote a foreword, and in it she talked about how not since Game of Thrones, and with the way we consume television or series today, it's unlikely it'll ever happen again that you went to work and everybody was talking about, did you see that last week?
That's true.
Miss when Game of Thrones came out, because if you did, somebody was going to tell you that Littlefinger betrayed Ned, and it would ruin your week. And that doesn't happen anymore. And I think
in the country. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, what did you say?
I was just like, that's exactly, you're just hit the nail on the head, because that is exactly how actual television worked culturally and socially in this country
for decades.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's something and I think that's something we lost, and it's all Netflix's fault. And I think because you had Stranger Things, and it was like Stranger Things. Oh, here's the entire episode or the entire series, and when Stranger Things came out, I watched the entire season in a night because it was fascinating and it was remarkably well done, especially the first season. But I think that changed expectations, and I think as other companies began to stream and make series for streaming, they copied Netflix, not because Netflix had figured it out. Everybody thought Netflix had figured it out, but just Netflix was the biggest dog because they'd been around and they were the ones who invested money in it first. And I think now we're starting to temper that, because I think maybe we're starting to realize, or the companies are starting to realize, that in order for a show to be culturally impactful, it either has to be, a Star Wars show because it has all of the weight of Star Wars behind it, or it has to capture the public like Game of Thrones did. Because yes, A Song of Ice and Fire had been out for 20 years, 15 years or so when the first Game of Thrones episode came out, but it was not that big. It was still relatively obscure outside of fantasy literature circles, but it became a cultural phenomenon. And if it hadn't been for the last two seasons butchering it, it would still be a cultural touchstone. I think House of the Dragon is maybe correcting that. We
have lost,
we lost it.
Television is no longer an event as it once was for prestigious programming. And even
all three of us said that we had viewing parties for Game of Thrones, and I don't know about y'all, but I haven't had a viewing party for a TV show since Game of Thrones.
Me either.
I will say, like, I have a number of friends that love Cobra Kai. They just released, Netflix has also, they do a mixture thing now, by the way, where they release half of a season and then they wait 45 days. So you have to subscribe for 2 months to see the second. Anyway, they,
well, it's because everybody would subscribe for a month and watch everything. But
yeah.
I think,
But hold on.
Ties into it. I mean, I remember the CEO saying that their biggest competitor was sleep.
So Cobra Kai they just released the first part of their final season middle of last month, and I was like, I watched it, and I kind of watched it like not I didn't binge it in one night, but I watched it while I getting some work done. And that's another thing is active viewing versus passive viewing. That's a totally another branch of this conversation. But other friends online who really enjoy Cobra Kai had no idea that the final season had started. Netflix didn't make it a big deal. It's because they release something every Friday. This week it happened to be that one show. So it's. TV is just no longer an event, and it's upsetting.
And I think that House of the Dragon, to bring it back around,
Sure.
I think House of the Dragon is almost recapturing a little bit of that experience in the confines of now it's on a streamer and it's not just on HBO cable or whatever. But aesthetically and in storytelling and through editing and all of those very cinematic qualities that are just not of television itself, and the experience of it. I think House of the Dragon is bringing back a little bit of that nostalgic experience of Game of Thrones, but also like it feels a little bit different and the reaction is different, I think, because it's living in the inescapable context of the streaming world. Kind of like how we're in the AI chat GPT world now, we're in the streaming world. And it's just something that you can't ignore. At least I think you can't ignore in the scope of.
You can't put the dragon back in the box.
You can't. It's like what's the myth of she opens the Pandora's box?
Yeah,
Pandora.
Yeah.
On that note, it's been a very interesting sort of meandering conversation as it always is. Thanks Adam and Katy.
Or why television sucks.
But this television doesn't suck. Neither does Friends, and I won't have you throwing shade on Friends.
It's just a
I'm not
clickbaity
throwing shade
subtitle.
on
No, Adam threw shade on Friends. Anyway, as always,
Throw shade on Friends.
thanks for watching.
I don't think I was the first person to reference Friends. It was just the opposite. And I think it was a good parallel because it's good syndicated television.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
All right, I accept. As always, thanks for watching. If you want to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Brandon. I'm Engine25 on all the things, sometimes with an underscore. You can find us on YouTube and podcast services by searching Engine25 Reviews. We'll be back soon with a new review, and until then, go watch a movie.